Welcome back to Questing Beast, I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at the Dark Crystal adventure game. This is a role-playing game created by Riverhorse Games, and it is mostly one big long adventure, or rather a big sandbox adventure written by Janet Forbes, and there are rules in it by Jack Caesar. The rules are just at the beginning right here and tell you how to run the adventure. It's a big, compact, all-in-one situation. The book is very pretty. They did a great job with the graphic design. There's our back cover right there. Another world, another time in an age of resistance. Because this is primarily based on the Dark Crystal TV show, which came out on Netflix not too long ago, and not so much on the movie back in the 80s. If you take the cover off, you actually have a really beautiful map on the inside, and the book looks really cool. Look at that. That's all imprinted into the cover of the book. So it looks like this really awesome artifact from inside the world of Thra if you lose the cover. Here is our map of the whole world, because you can travel anywhere in any direction and explore things as you please. All the regions are listed over here as to where you can find them in the book, and there are some basic rules for traveling across the world. Now, longtime viewers on the channel might recognize that it looks awfully similar to Jim Henson's Labyrinth, the adventure game, which I worked on. And indeed, it is a follow-up to it. This has basically the same structure in that it's mostly one big adventure with some rules at the front for you to use to run it. However, there are some important differences. For example, in the Labyrinth game, there is a great deal of structure around the adventure in that you start out outside the labyrinth and you always try and work your way towards the center. And I wrote lots of these 1-page or 2-page scenarios or problems or encounters that you would run into as you progressed your way through. The scenes that you would run into and the order that you would find them in would change with every time you ran through the adventure. And my focus was really on trying to create self-contained problems for the players to deal with at each scene, because that mirrors pretty closely how the movie Labyrinth works. The Dark Crystal, on the other hand, while it still has 100 different scenes or locations for you to encounter, is much less about making each of those its own little session or its own little problem to solve, because you can move much more freely between them and they can influence each other as you explore. Let's take a look inside the book. The laws of Thra are the laws of life itself, from the smallest grub to Leviathan of the deep. It is hubris alone that rages against these bonds. No matter the struggle, judgment is all the same. This book really does assume that you're pretty familiar with the world of the Dark Crystal, whether you've watched the movie or more prominently the TV show, because that has much more of an influence on this. But there is primers at the beginning going through basically what the world is, the different factions, the different species, and how they are connected together. The rule system is definitely much more robust than in Labyrinth. In the Labyrinth game, it is very minimalistic because it focuses very strongly on out-of-the-box problem solving rather than using mechanics. This one feels much more like a traditional role-playing game in that it has more fleshed out mechanics. You have your different main attributes right here. You have kind of these specializations within them. You can advance them to masteries, you gain experience points, and so forth. It feels much more like a open world D&D exploration game. One really great thing is that there is a calendar for the game master to use to keep track of time. Because just like in the Labyrinth game, where you had 13 hours to beat the game, just like in the movie, in this one you have 99 days to accomplish this world-spanning mission. This allows for time to become a real consequence. If players want to do something really tricky, you can say, well, that's going to take this much time or this many days. Players are going to have to plan and be efficient with how they're traveling and with how they're trying to accomplish their mission rather than just waffling around and doing whatever they feel like. Each of the dark purple circles on this calendar represents the darkening. So different regions of the map will become corrupted and they will actually change after each one of these ticks is passed. So the world will get more difficult as time goes on. This is definitely intended to be a person's first role-playing game that they run. So there's a lot of really great, solid, fundamental advice for new game masters about how to approach a role-playing game. When you're creating a character, you can start out by picking your clan, and you're always going to be one of the different clans of Gelflings, and you're going to pick a couple of their special abilities. The artwork is actually really good. It's a mix of stuff done by Brian Froud, who's a famous illustrator, who I think did a lot of concept art for the original movie, as well as some work by, by Chris Caesar, who's Jack Caesar's brother, and even Iris Compiet, I'm not sure how to say her name, who's a really great graphic designer working in the kind of otherworld fairy genre. In the past, I've actually looked at some of her concept art here on the channel, like in Fairies of the Fault Lines, which has a lot of really beautiful and creative fantasy artwork. Your skills are going to include agility, animals, fighting, scouting, lore, social, and brawn, but there are specializations inside of those. And you're also going to be picking a flaw, which you can gain XP for if you play into it. You're always going to start in the same place. You're all summoned to the Mystic Valley, where you're going to be told that you need to collect these 7 seeds scattered around the world of Thra and bring them together back at the valley in order to save the world. So although this is an open world game, there is a real fail state to it. If you take too much time, or if you're all defeated, then you have failed the campaign and you can try again. As befits a beginning RPG, the rules are very straightforward. When you want to do a test, you simply pick a difficulty number from 2 through 10, and then you're going to roll a die, add a couple of bonuses to it, one if you're trained, another if you have specialization, and another if you are a master at that, and you're going to try and hit that difficulty number. The test can also be improved and hindered by circumstances. That works out to advantage and disadvantage, just like in D&D. Now, the die that you are typically going to be rolling is going to be a D6, but that can change because as you get damaged, the die can actually reduce down to like a D4, and then if it goes even lower than that, then you start taking injuries. This does use a slot-based encumbrance system, which I like. Normally you can carry up to 5 pieces of gear, so not very much, but you are a smallish creature. 6 pieces if you are trained in brawn. And the gear is quite important. Having the right gear for the job can give you advantage, and having the wrong kind or not using it when you needed it can give you disadvantage. Fighting is generally going to be a contested roll where you're rolling your die against your opponent's die and seeing who gets the higher result. There's no rolling for damage. Typically, if you win a bout, then you simply reduce the opponent's die size by 1. And if it's too low, then they just die. You can gain XP in a session by simply showing up, by being held back by your flaws, so role-playing that. And each player, including the GM, has 1 XP they can reward to a PC for a heroic action they performed during this session. You cannot award XP to your own PC. You must say why you are giving it when it's given. You can spend that XP on training in a new skill, specializing, or even becoming a master if you find someone to train with. It's also possible to gain new traits or special abilities. Sometimes in particular scenes, there will be ways that you can upgrade your characters if you do the right thing. There's a number of good tips here for game masters and just on how to run a session smoothly. It's kept very minimalistic because you don't want to overload people when they're running a game for the first time. A brief rundown of the world of Thra and a timeline, just so you know generally the context that this is taking place in. Although, like I said, this will be quite confusing if you haven't actually seen the movie and TV show. So strongly recommend you do that first. Next, we get to the actual meat of the book, which is the adventure, the 100 scenes that you can travel through in all sorts of different orders in order to try and beat the campaign. But first, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by the Game Master's Compendium of Explosive Creation. Does prepping for your game feel like a slog? Does your world need a spark of inspiration? This book is a cornucopia of ideas and prompts that make campaign creation fun again. It is absolutely packed with tables for plot hooks, thematic monsters, evocative locations, original magic items, NPCs, factions, motivations, and so much more. Never be caught flat-footed as a game master again with the Game Master's Compendium of Explosive Creation. Check it out right now at DriveThruRPG using the link in the description below. All right, how does the adventure work? Well, there are a lot of scenes in this book, so I don't have time to show you all of them, but hopefully we can get the general sense of how they function. First of all, we have these different regions. This is the Silver Sea, so that would be this area around there. We always have a region 2-page spread, and then we get into a bunch of locations within that region. So for example, the Silver Sea has these 4 locations over here, which are listed briefly down here, and then it tells you what page to go to in order to get the full story. It also has a number of locations that are not in this region, but are directly adjacent to it. So you might want to travel from there to there, and you will need to know what page to go to. Overall, this book is very well laid out, and it is extremely cross-referenced. There are page numbers everywhere, so it's very quick to find what you're looking for. Just like in the Labyrinth adventure game, it keeps pretty much everything on 2-page spreads. Virtually every scene that you come to is right there. You run it directly off of these pages. I also thought it was pretty funny that the style of the maps that are used in here are very similar to the maps that I drew in the Labyrinth game. So they're kind of copying my map making style, which I thought was really funny. I kind of appreciate it actually. The main structure of a scene is that you have some, I guess that could be read aloud text, but really it's for the game master just to orient them as to how this is going to go. All of the different major areas within this scene are labeled right down here for easy reference. There's very frequently going to be random tables for generating new stuff in the scene, so it can change every time you visit it. And there's often new special abilities that you can, in theory, pick up if you talk to the right people and do the right thing. Down at the bottom, we have this box for the darkening. So this is how this scene changes if this area becomes infected by the darkening. I like how this gives you very concrete ideas for how this region has become corrupted or changed by the forces of evil. Now, the Labyrinth game did some weird little tricks with book construction, where, for example, it had a pocket down at the bottom where you could hide dice, and this book also has some fun little tricks that it pulls off as well. For example, there's a number of scenes in here that actually fold out and become much larger. Like this is a huge sea monster which can swallow you if you are out at sea. And after you get swallowed, is that the end of the game? No, now you have an adventure inside its belly, where there's a number of different creatures and factions fighting for supremacy. There's a number of possible solutions. You can get it to try and vomit you out, or you can go out to the other end. But there's also lakes of acid, there's monsters that want to kill you, there's all sorts of things for you to encounter and mess with. You might encounter the Lost Island, which has a volcano and a number of lava flows, but if you go through one of the caves on the side, you can find these secret passages within. An uncharted archipelago with a number of weird islands that are each doing something strange. One of the seeds is actually present right here, grows slowly at its owner's command, creating a simple item once a day. Or you might find this dagger that is completely invisible at night. Lots of good, simple magic items that do one weird thing that the players can find a use for. Here's another region, the Sedan coast, right next to the Silver Sea. Lots of port towns up and down here. The way that travel typically works is that if you're moving between locations within one region, that generally doesn't lose you any days. But if you travel out of the region to another one, then you can lose some time. Every day of travel, you can roll an encounter on this random table. For example, you might meet Marty, a Spritan farmer on his way to the Sathwa night market. He hopes to trade his Nebri cheese for good luck, so that his son will return safely from war. Or there might be a scree. The path here passes through loose scree, making it lethal to walk here. All travelers must be skilled, climbing 5 or fly, 1 damage on failure, patient, in which case they lose a day, or find a different path. I like that because it doesn't just depend on passing a roll to succeed, which you see in a lot of D&D adventures. There's a number of options that have real impact on the adventure. So that's generally how all of these scenes go. There's lots of people to talk to, a high number of just NPCs that can give you information. A lot of different clans know things about where you would probably find the different seeds. So getting oriented in terms of where you're probably going to go next isn't too difficult, which I like, because I think just wandering around trying to find clues can become pretty frustrating. The level of problem solving and puzzliness in this book is definitely toned down from what I was trying to do in Labyrinth. There's oftentimes some interesting situation or a problem that you could deal with at each of these places, but it doesn't really force you to. Although there's often a good deal of connections between scenes. Something in one scene will reference something happening in a totally different place in Thra. I think that's really smart, especially since it's such a small, compact campaign. It's great to see things being connected together because players are going to notice that too. Like here, for example, at this scientist retreat, there is clues about these Giga-Garthams, which are these gigantic crab creatures, which you probably haven't encountered yet, but you will later on. And there's clues here as to how you could defeat them, what's going to actually frighten them. Or at the top of this tower, there's a telescope, and looking through it, you can observe locations in adjacent regions. So you find out what region you're in, find the ones nearby, and then you can tell them the different major locations. If they zoom in on it, you just flip to that page and just find a feature there that they see. Although, like I said, it's very well laid out. One thing that was slightly confusing is the order of the regions. The regions seem to be presented in the book in no particular order. It just jumps around the map, and I found that a bit confusing. But there is a table of contents on the inside flap, so it is pretty easy to look that stuff up. Here's a great little item, podling grade soap, because you're chasing around these little podlings and trying to clean them. Anything coated with this becomes extremely slippery and then extremely clean. I can think of all sorts of ways that players could use that even in combat. Players can also compete to try and clean the most of these podlings, and if they do, they gain Podling Bane. Podlings know to fear you. So frequently there's these tiny little side quests that you can go on that upgrade your character and tie you into the world as well. There's a number of cities scattered throughout the world, and those are often these big extended adventures or extended scenes where there's tons of books and paladins and travelers and denizens, so you can rapidly pull up all sorts of things for players to talk to and encounter. Overall, I think it nails the tone and the feel of the Dark Crystal movies and shows very well. There's actually a lot of material in here that I haven't seen in any of the official material, although maybe the writer, Janet, looked through some of the extra material like the comic books and the novels and things like that that are tied to it. I'm not sure where it all came from, how much is official, how much she made up, but it works really well together. And I feel like fans of this world would get a kick out of this book even if they're not into role-playing games specifically. One of the things that I appreciate about this book is that despite being a beginner's RPG, it doesn't really hold your hand all that much. Your characters are fairly weak and they can die if you don't play your cards right. And of course, if you take too long, the world can become fully corrupted and you lose the campaign as a whole. Occasionally, there are bits of the book that feel a little railroady, like if this happens, then make sure that this happens because it would be more dramatic. And you can run things that way, or you could just ignore it, really. But really, there is just a ton of content in here, and it is very much focused on what is there. And it presents it neutrally, and it allows players to figure out how to use it, and allows them to create their own paths, forge their own destinies, and explore the world how they want to. To be honest, it's really one of the better introductions that I've seen to the open world campaign style of play, which is pretty surprising. You'd expect an adventure like this to be very railroady and to have like a pre-written adventure that you're kind of forced to go through in a certain order, but it really resists that urge, and I think it should be commended for that. One of the biggest scenes in the book is the Crystal Castle, which is where the Skeksis, which are these vulture-like monsters who are the bad guys, that's where they live with the Dark Crystal itself, and it has this big double fold-out adventure. Bit of a castle crawl right here as you get chased around by them and their huge crab-like minions. I do wish that in some of the locations they were fleshed out a little bit more with things to do. Some of them seem pretty bare bones, but I think the intention here is for this to be mostly a chase scene, so there's probably not a lot of activities that are necessary. There's the Mystic Valley where you have to take all of the seeds at the end, the Burnt Wood, Forest End, Bleakwood, the Hand of Thra, Heart of Trabam, Skarn's Fury, the Endless Forest. Ultimately, what I want when I'm running a big open world campaign is just content. I want stuff that I can use, that I can put into my world that players can interact with. And this book is just not ashamed to give that to you. I do want to show you this cool feature right here. You have the gauntlet where you go down into this room and then a series of traps go off that you have to avoid before you can get into the room over here. And to figure out how they work, you have this see-through overlay that you put over it, which is really cool. I haven't seen any other books try that. At least this map overlay is really fun. It's actually really hard to read this part because you can see that the words kind of overlap there. So you have to hold it up a little bit like this so that you can read it. Then occasionally push down this onto the room so that becomes clear. But it is a fun little gimmick. One region is the Caves of Grot, which is kind of a mini mega dungeon with lots of little rooms that you can explore. One thing I did notice though is that there's not really a lot of interconnections and looping, which I think would have improved it a little bit. Pretty much it's a tree structure. So you go in one direction. If you branch off in to the left, you can explore that whole branch, and then you have to go back to the main center and then explore off in another direction. There isn't a lot of rooms where you can approach it from more than one direction. But this area is big enough that each of the rooms on this map get their own 2-page spread right up, so you can have a pretty extensive dungeon crawl as you explore through the whole thing. Here's another one of those overlay areas. You have the Tomb of Relics, which when you go through here seems like just a big ring of rooms, but these are all secret passages, and you can unlock your way to the center by finding all of the secrets. And those are all labeled on this overlay like that. I feel like there's a lot of potential in role-playing games in general to use little tricks like this to make things easier for the game master to grok. There's a section back here for what happens when a character dies, how to have a funeral for them, how to create a new character, and even possible options for when you have a total party kill. One issue that I don't like is that near the back of the book, there's a section called the finale, which points out that after you have found 6 of the seeds and you're about to go for the 7th, then there should always be a disaster where the Skeksis swoop in, grab that last seed, and take it back to their castle, so you have to have a confrontation there. First of all, I don't know why this is at the back of the book. It should be near the front so that as you're reading through the book, you can have that in mind. But secondly, it's one of those few instances in the book where it's trying to force a certain dramatic conclusion, whether you want it or not. The rest of the book is so open and so good at promoting player choice and player freedom that it feels like a weird thing to put there at the end. However, as a game master, you can easily tweak that or simply ignore it. I love that there is a toolkit here at the back with herbs, food, and drink for you to use, lots of different pieces of gear, including simple gear, just normal stuff that you would find in a D&D dungeon crawl, like chains and hats and thieves' tools and crowbars. A really great looking little bestiary for the creatures of Thra. Very simple stat blocks. Basically, there's just one number, which is their die size. Sometimes they have a little tweak to their rules, like the blind fish gain +2 on challenges against creatures making a lot of noise. Big fan of all of Iris's work right here. It blends into Brian Froud's stuff very well. I like how some of these monsters also really promote problem solving. Like you got this Giga Garthim, and the Giga Garthim ignores damage by anything that couldn't smash a tree. So coming up against him in a direct fight is pretty much a terrible idea unless you have a really great plan for how you're going to do massive damage to him all at once. But of course, he also has a weakness. He will go into a confused rage if he is subjected to high-pitched noises. And your character can't innately make high-pitched noises, but maybe you can find a way to do that. The bestiary section on Gelfling has all the different tribes, as well as random tables for generating new Gelfling with their personality traits and other weird things about them, like they're fascinated by stars, rarely looks where they're going. All sorts of great weird creatures like the Landstriders, the Mystics, the Rough-Gnaws. At the back there is a gallery, which is really just screenshots from the movie and the TV show, which is actually kind of nice. So you have a frame of reference for what these things look like in a more realistic setting, and encourages you to get out there and watch the source material. Just as in the Labyrinth book, there is a bookmark that you can use that also has rule summaries on it, which is really smart. It's also a little funny because the book does come with 3 bookmarks. So I don't know if you actually need a 4th one, but it is nice to have. So that is the Dark Crystal, the adventure game. Honestly, I was really impressed by this and I came in pretty skeptical. I expected it to be more linear than it turned out to be. It's really one of the best introductions that I've read to an open world style of play. Apart from a little bit of railroading here and there, which I think you can mostly ignore, it does a great job of showing new game masters that having a big world full of things that players can interact with however they want is not going to be too challenging to run. There are certainly gaps that you have to fill in here and there because some of the scenes are a bit abbreviated, but it gives you a very strong understructure to build on. It takes the world of Thra, a world from a fantasy children's movie, and makes it feel very particular, very concrete, very real, and that's a rare thing to see. As usual, if you want to pick this up for yourself, I will put a link to where you can find it, as well as the Labyrinth adventure game down in the description below. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.